Hello, Professor Amouzou. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar series on the agriculture and the biotechnology. So before starting this webinar session, first I would like to thank all the participants who are now watching this webinar, and also thanks to our partners from OCP-Africa and RUFORUM. So the webinar series this webinar series is part of the webinar series that has been developed in the movement of solidarity for Africa. Okay, today is my pleasure to host Professor KOKOU AMOUZOU from African Plant Nutrition Institute. So Professor Amouzou, as an introduction, is from Togo and is the program coordinator for the African Plant Nutrition Institute, based in Yamoussoukro in Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire. So he's responsible for the West Africa part for APNI. So Dr. KOKOU received his diploma of agronomist engineer and master degree from École Supérieure d'Agronomie, University of Lomé in Togo. He obtained his doctoral PhD of agriculture science from the Faculty of Agriculture and University of Bonn in Germany. Dr. Amouzou has worked for ADI Consulting Africa as board research and capacity building officer and vice general director. Professor Amouzou was also a junior researcher for the Center for Development Research at the University of Bonn. So before joining the African Plant Nutrition Institute, Dr. Amouzou was agronomist for the International Plant Nutrition Institute West Africa program, where he focused on the implementation, development, and dissemination of site-specific nutrient management practices for sustainable crop production, intensification in a range of crops. He also coordinated the development of nutrient management, decision support tools, managed agronomic trials and agronomic data, and developed scientific publication and extension products. Dr. Amouzou research continued to focus on cropping systems analysis and modeling, integrated soil fertility management, site-specific nutrient management, nutrient and water use efficiencies, sustainable intensification, climate change, and agriculture and food security. So for the one who just joined us, again, it's my pleasure to host today Professor KOKOU AMOUZOU from the African Plant Nutrition Institute. He's based in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and he will share with us today a topic on plant nutrition. So I get to know Professor Amouzou thanks to my colleague Rob Mickelson from the African Plant Nutrition Institute. And just to mention that this institute is based in Morocco at Ben Guerir, close to the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. And this institute is really conducting very strong research in plant nutrition. And they also they have implemented and still implementing and developing curriculum program for training expert professional and scientists in the domain of plant nutrition. So before handing the floor to Professor Amouzou, again, I would like to thank you for your participation to this webinar. And also I would like to thank our strategic partners, OCP-Africa and RUFORUM. Professor Amouzou, the floor is yours. I'm going to put your presentation. So
thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Aziz. I thank you for the opportunity that you give to me to present to the audience today plant nutrition strategy for climate change adaptation in Africa. Through my presentation, I will start with some background information. Next, focus our attention on plant nutrition strategy as a shift in soil fertility management paradigm in Africa. I'll also highlight trend of climate change across Africa with focus on temperature and rainfall variability. I'll come to climate change impact and adaptation option. And finally, I will complete my presentation with a short conclusion and research outlook. As a background information, Africa is currently challenged by rapid population growth. As shown in this table, from the projection of African population, more than half of African population will live in main cities by mid-21st century. This will put tremendous stress on food supply systems. On this graph, we see food demand as well as the feed demand across different regions in the world based on assessments done by International Water Management Institute for comprehensive assessment of water management in agriculture using water sim model. Globally, in OECD countries, or even in East Asia and worldwide, food demand will drive crop production in the future, as you will see it in the red circle. But particularly for Africa, in the blue rectangle here, you'll notice that food demand will remain dominant in the future. So the increased food demand in Africa will roughly double by the mid of the 21st century, driven by the increasing population, urbanization, but also changes in diet. Africa has to satisfy increasing food demand, but it is well recognized that Africa is challenged by soil degradation, which threats rain-fed food production systems across the countries. As you can see it on this map, nutrient-limited areas are widespread across the continent, from West Africa to East Africa and even South Africa. And the nutrients depletion or limitation is coupled with water stress as well. So water stress, particularly in dry savanna and Sahelian zone, and some parts in East Africa. First means that the spiraling decline in land productivity for food is a reality in Africa and also for other ecosystem services. And surprisingly, nearly 3.3% of agriculture GDP is annually lost in Africa because of nutrient losses. So this call researchers and farming population alike, even private sector, to work in improving sustainably nutrient management in Africa cropping systems. How soil fertility paradigm evolves in Africa. After the independence, so around 80s, the focus was on use of increased external inputs, mainly inorganic fertilizer alone, for proper crop nutrition and improve crop productivity. And in this paradigm, mineral fertilizer played a major role while organic amendment play a minimal role. And traditionally, as witnessed by slash and burn cropping practices worldwide in Africa, farmers rely on nutrient cycling in soil plant systems. And at that time, land are available. But due to the increasing populations, there is a tremendous pressure on land resources. So relying on a soil natural nutrient recycling to sustain food productivity will no longer sustain a crop productivity. So there is a need to shift to better nutrient management, but particularly the sole use of inorganic fertilizer to improve yield have success in Asia and even in Latin America. But in the context of Africa, the success was minimal or partial due to a shortfall in infrastructure, policy, and even in farming systems. Therefore, around 80s, due to fertilizer, inorganic fertilizer affordability and accessibility, and the increasing or emerging awareness of adverse impact of inorganic fertilizer on environment, the focus was put on use of organic amendment as a main source of nutrients. In this paradigm, inorganic fertilizer play a minor role, but to use organic amendments as a nutrient source to maintain or at least improve soil fertility, there are many challenges, like excessive land need to provide organic input or extra labor needed, as well as a livestock ownership. So those constraints limit the adoption of organic amendment as a soil fertility management strategy to boost crop productivity. Therefore, in 90s, based on several research evidence, the focus was on the use of integrated approach, combining inorganic fertilizer and organic amendment to boost a crop productivity. And in this paradigm, more rational use of plant nutrients is targeted for improving or optimizing crop nutrition through balanced, efficient, yield target, and site-specific nutrient supply. So for this paradigm, inorganic fertilizers are used and effective nutrient recycling are both essential to sustain a crop production. Therefore, for the second paradigm emerged integrated soil fertility management strategy as a agricultural system innovation integrated package, as well as integrated nutrient management, but particularly across Africa now, the domestication of 4R nutrient stewardship is playing an important role with focus on improving crop productivity, profitability in environmentally sound manner using the right source of nutrients at the right rate, right time, and right place. But as I showed it previously in one of the slides, nutrients and water stresses are playing against a crop productivity across Africa. Therefore, the development of integrated nutrient and water management approach become crucial for improving not only nutrient use efficiency, but also water use efficiency. In the full ISFM technologies, there is integration of improved germplasm, as you can see it in the graph in my right. Improved germplasm integrated with inorganic fertilizer and organic amendment, but coupled with local adaptation, with local knowledge. The evidence exists in West Africa and in East Africa on the advantage of applying ISFM to improve fertilizer use efficiency. But to what level agricultural system innovation are adopted by the end users in Africa? From this table, a number of components, 0 for instance, you'll see this is after the great job done by Adola. The current practices combining in traditional varieties in low input production systems remain dominant in West Africa, with the case example of a tamale in Ghana, where more than 80% of surveyed farmers are still using traditional varieties or are recycling improved varieties under low input condition, compared to 19% or about 20% in Kakamega in Kenya. For the component 1, improve germ plus fertilizer, this component at least is also critical as a first step to close the large yield gap existing in Africa. But unfortunately, about 5% of the respondents and 36% in Kenya adopt that package. But coming down to the full ISFM package, combining improved germ plus fertilizer, organic amendment with local adaptation capacity, only 3% adopt that technology, the full ISFM in West Africa, against 36% in East Africa, in Kenya. This difference in the innovation adoption between the two regions is mainly explained by improved seed availability. But furthermore, soil physical and chemical properties play also an important role in the adoption of the technology aside resource endowment as a financial, but also land tenure and some social aspects like farmers network membership, the livestock ownership as well. So those several factors place against adoption of a system innovation in Africa, but still system innovation that combine synergistic agronomic and management components to improve crop productivity and environmental resilience are critically needed in the context of Africa to boost crop productivity and sustain food security and livelihood across the continent. Now, coming to the trend of climate change and variabilities in Africa, I can say that historically, Africa experienced already warming through heat wave spot or even drying and wetting conditions across the continent. As you can see it in the first map here, that shows mean annual temperature in Africa, dry warming is obvious in West Africa, going up to increasing going to Sahel, but also in South Africa with some a cool place in East Africa. On the second map, that report changes in annual precipitation, dry conditions occur in West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, as well as in North Africa, but East Africa still in, showing wet conditions. But the warming climate, for sure, will put additional stress on the resources used in Africa since soil fertility depletion are affecting rainfall production systems. Under projected climate change scenario using several climate models, warming is likely to continue in Africa for the future period. And according to the model and representative concentration pathway or RCP considered, the warming can fluctuate between 1 to 4 degrees. And the hotspot of warming, as you can see here in the map, it is over all the continent. Therefore, the reduction even in emission under below 2 degrees, is it sufficient to reduce the negative impact of climate change in crop production in Africa? We will see some of the answers across the following slide. Expected changes in growing season precipitation in the low emission scenario meaning RCP 2.6, it shows a large disparities in its expected rainfall. But still, we can see in the first map around 2040s, some place with a decreases in rainfall. But in West Africa, the situation is looking in increase of rainfall, but going to 2080s, decreases in rainfall is becoming obvious in South Africa, but also in West Africa, in the Sahel zone, with a wet condition prevailing in East Africa. But it is important, as you can see it in the right corner of my slide, the take-home message that shows the rapid reduction even in greenhouse gas, keeping the warming below 2 degrees will reduce the negative impact of climate change, while if the rainfall condition even give a significant wet condition, the warming that is experienced or going to happen in the continent will put a crop response under stress. Montpellier panel exploring solution for climate-driven challenge highlight some key points that remain critical and important today. Need for more comprehensive water and climate data and information. Broad application of use of climate predictions and improve management of soil, nutrient, and water. These 3 points, soil, nutrient, and water, will keep our attention in exploring adaptation strategy in terms of self-management option in the coming slides. Adaptation strategy to climate change depend on time scale. For instance, in short-term adaptation, which enable better coping strategy with the current climate variability, are termed as incremental adaptation strategies. And evidence exists also that adapting crop varieties, going for a drought-tolerant crop varieties, adjustment of planting times, space, and use of crop residue, recycling them, couple them with water management and nutrient management options, or canopy management are approach or are technique that can be used under incremental adaptation strategy to cope with the current variability. And evidence exists across the continent, and particularly in Africa, in West Africa. But going into the time at a mid-term adaptation strategy, this is termed as system adaptation, looking for crop diversification and risk management, or going from climate-sensitive precision agriculture, or climate change-ready crops. Those options can be developed and deployed in a midterm, but at the long term, with focus in system transformation, like changes in land use or new products or ecosystem services, those are termed under transformational adaptation strategies. But coming to climate change impacts in Africa, I would like to first highlight the impact of climate change on growing period. According to Thornton et al., the growing period of the mega crops will be reduced under warming climate with 4-degree scenario up to 20%. This will occur because with warming conditions, growing degree day will increase quickly with the consequence of impact on biomass productivity, which will go at the expense of soil moisture and nutrients that will become unavailable during the critical phases like a grain filling and resulting in reduction in a grain yield. Climate change impacts on grain yield across Africa show a decreasing pattern, but this mainly for C4 crops, so cereal, but some case example exists that benefits. A C3 crop will benefit from elevated CO2 environment, like a cotton, that will increase the productivity. But one question remains. If evidence exists that improved soil fertility management can improve crop yield under current conditions, what is the nature or the magnitude of the effect of improved crop nutrition approach under future climate conditions? And in the face of the complex soil, plant, and atmosphere systems, such as those prevailing in the different agroecological conditions in Africa, there is a crucial need to go for system analysis required to come up with a meaningful alternatives. Historically, and even it is still true today, field research play an important role in the development of soil fertility management strategies. But applying or conducting field trial to assess climate condition, climate impact, it is also possible by taking into consideration a climate analog sites, meaning areas which are experience a climate condition that are projected for other agroecological conditions. So I can give the example, like one can test soil fertility management strategy in a dry savanna condition and think about the transfer geographically of the innovation developed there to wet savanna condition. If the conditions that are prevailing in the dry savanna area currently are expected to be the one that must prevail in the wet savanna agroecological zone. So using climate analog sites, it is possible to test a site for developing and trialing soil fertility management adaptation strategy and then transfer them geographically to another areas as climate change progresses. But conduct a long-term field trial need a lot of investment, financially or in terms of labor or input and so on. Therefore, to capture the climate, soil, crop, and management interaction, crop model are variable decision support tool that can help to track the potential or to assess the potential climate change impact and tracking the underlying complex biophysical process occurring in the soil in terms of soil carbon, nutrient, and water dynamic. But before using crop model as a decision support tool to assess soil fertility management strategies under climate change condition, is important to parameterize the crop model with a field research output or data so that the crop model are able to rigorously account for the underlying soil water and plant nutrient demand, CO2 effects, and temperature interaction when simulating climate change impact and framing more sustainable nutrient management measures. Therefore, I come to the point that I have to show some result of case study in which I'm directly involved or indirectly. And this first part that I would like to share with you on the result of the parameterization and the evaluation of cereals maize and cereal sorghum model for modeling growth, nitrogen and phosphorus uptake and soil moisture dynamic in the dry savanna of West Africa. This work was done as a prerequisite to analyze the suitability of both models in assessing the underlying soil process that I have highlighted previously, and then apply the model to assess climate change impact. And for sure, the results show that cereals maize and cereals sorghum models simulate well a plant's nitrogen and phosphorus uptake and capture with satisfaction in-season soil moisture and nitrogen dynamic. But one aspect using crop model in West Africa, where a soil identified as poor in nitrogen and phosphorus, is the evidence that crop model can work under such agroecological condition, and evidence provided through this study show the robustness of the cereals cropping system model in the framework of a desert model to perform under a dry savanna condition in West Africa. Now I come to the test of some plant nutrition strategies in the face of a climate change scenario. And here, I will call on board the results of a recent work done by Falconi et al., a work in which I provide some data set as input to assess or how a series, maize, and other models can help capture climate change impact on maize yield under low nitrogen input conditions in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this study evaluated the impact of varying CO2 concentration, temperature, and rainfall conditions on maize yield for different nitrogen management for 5 environments in Sub-Saharan Africa, but using an ensemble of 25 maize crop models. Using an ensemble of crop models is actually innovative in this work because of uncertainty that occur in using a single model to capture a climate change impact on crop response. And as a result, the 25 crop model capture very well maize grain yield, but under climate change conditions, the model showed that intensification of maize will result in higher yield, but will be more sensitive to climate change. And one result that is important is the fact that the model explicitly accounting for nitrogen stress and leaching on daily basis show a stronger interaction. This is evidence showing that to capture climate change impact, there is a real need that the model capture the underlying nutrient dynamic, and particularly water dynamic, that can affect in a drying condition that are projected in future for the nutrients availability and their uptake by crop. Next, I would like to show also a result of climate change impacts on some key cereal in West Africa based on the results of Faye et al. Research conducted in a same program that I was involved, which is West Africa Climate Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use, WASCAL. These results confirm the previous slide showing that with intensification, yield losses due to climate change will be larger than with a current fertilizer level, meaning a low input systems in Africa. As you can see it in the first graph here for maize, the current soil fertility management practices, and the intensification one, the changes under 2-degree condition are in the red box, and the changes in yield for 1.5 degree scenario are in blue. Regardless the scenarios, changes in yield are higher for the intensification condition, irrespective of the crop as well. Millet and sorghum also show a similar case. This could be probably explained by a nitrogen stress under a current condition, and when warming is raising the stress of nitrogen can explain why, under current conditions, the relative changes of yield are higher for intensification scenarios. Now, I'm now with the last point of my case studies. So I will show the results of a study that I have conducted on climate change impact on water and nitrogen use efficiency and yield of maize and sorghum in the dry savanna of West Africa. This study used a serious maize model to analyze the impact of climate change, assuming 3 soil fertility management scenarios, meaning current practices without fertilization. The second scenario, termed as integrated soil crop management strategy, it combines a current soil fertility management recommendation with a crop residue recycling. And the third scenario, termed as high use of mineral fertilizer, which is approximately the double of the current fertilizer recommendation, was used as an intensification option. So as a result, the first graph shows confidence interval for changes in nitrogen uptake under the current condition of soil fertility management in the region considered as a control, and integrated soil crop management, that is one can assimilate it to integrated soil fertility management, and the intensification option here as a high use of mineral fertilizer. This assessment was done assuming 3 representative concentration pathways, meaning RCP 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5. As you can see it on the graph, nitrogen uptake of maize reduced tremendously regardless the scenario assumed, but with the higher impacts under RCP 8.5 scenario. Similar results was found for phosphorus uptake, where here RCP 8.5 scenario show the largest reduction in phosphorus uptake, meaning that in Africa, or particularly in the dry savanna agroecological condition of West Africa, 4-degree world will have a tremendous impact on maize nutrients uptake. This graph here shows the first graph, labeled as A1, show water use efficiency under the different climate change scenario, assuming the 3 soil fertility management option, the control one as a current management strategy, current fertilizer recommendation combined with a crop residue recycling, and the intensification. The results indicate that across soil fertility management options, water use efficiency will be reduced from 17 to 53% compared to the baseline scenario. The graph labeled A2 show nitrogen internal use efficiency and partial factor productivity. Across soil fertility management options, partial factor productivity will be reduced likely from 10 to 47%, while internal use efficiency of nitrogen will be reduced by 5 to 33%. From these results, one aspect is important to be highlighted. For nutrient use efficiency, we saw here that with integrated soil crop management options, the partial factor productivity, regardless the decreasing pattern, remain higher than the intensification condition, highlighting the importance of a crop residue recycling in boosting efficiency of inorganic fertilizer. This evidence is obvious under a current climate condition through field research, and crop modeling is giving similar results under a future climate scenario. So I will spend more time on the graph of the yield, but importantly, we can keep in the mind that under projected climate change condition, water and nitrogen use efficiency will likely decrease, but improve soil crop management as a recycling of organic sources, organic matter from different sources could help improve yield, even though it can't offset completely the overall yield loss of climate change. It helps mitigate the adverse impact of climate change. So, in conclusion, let me say that climate change will likely reduce water and nitrogen use efficiency as well as yield across the case studies show for West Africa and in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this is likely to occur irrespective of presently known and recommended soil fertility management strategy. But under future climate conditions, integrated soil fertility management will result in higher nitrogen partial factor productivity compared to high use of inorganic fertilizers. As a research outlook, the results presented here, particularly for water use efficiency, must be treated with caution due to biological mechanism shortcoming that exist currently in the crop model structure in simulating water and nutrient use efficiency in response to elevated CO2 environment. It is critical important to update parameterization and code of the cropping system model to have a sufficiently strong effect of CO2 on stomatal conductance and on transpiration. Because currently, crop model use radiation use efficiency to account for CO2 effects. But in warming conditions, water vapor deficit will increase and thus affect a crop physiological response and resource use efficiency. So it is very important that research focus on those aspects in future. It is also important to conduct a field research that can help generate a data on soil carbon dynamic, nitrogen and phosphorus dynamic, as well as soil moisture dynamic that can help crop models to improve the crop model in their ability to capture the dynamic of those parameters as they affect the crop growth and nutrient requirements. The last, in Africa, we need good and continuous and quality data from field research, from weather stations, to support adequate hard and software with appropriate method and tool to generate strategy to adapt to climate change condition. And for that, capacity building and education on sustainable nutrient management are also required. Thank you for attention. Your question and suggestion are welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Amouzou, for this presentation and for having elaborated on this very important topic in relationship to the changing climate context. So it is true that plant nutrition is a major concern, and some of our previous speaker has highlighted the importance of plant nutrition and how it affects the human health. But thank you for having put this in the context of the changing climate. This was really very informative and really gives some insights on how this can be managed in the midterm and the long term for agriculture, for sustainable agriculture. So I know that some of the people have joined at the middle of our webinar. So do not worry too much, because the webinar by Professor KOKOU AMOUZOU will be broadcasted after this, at the end of the talk, at the end of this session. You can watch it through the ESAFE UM6P channel. You can watch it from the beginning, so you will not miss the first part. So you can also watch all the other webinars that has been already implemented. So let's go and look for some questions from the audience. I just would like to remind also to inform Professor Amouzou that his webinar was being viewed by people from, I counted, more than 30 countries. And the majority of them, 70%, are from Sub-Saharian countries. So people are really were concerned about this topic, and I got many comments about how good was the topic, and how the topic is so important to the scientific community from Sub-Saharian country, of course, for Africa and also worldwide. So let me get some of the questions. I start with this long one. So we have Ibrahim Ali saying that decision support tools differ according to category or type of decision to be made. The question is, what are suitable models that can be used for assessing nutrient management's impact and the changing climate in Sub-Saharan countries, Sub-Saharan Africa?
Okay, thank you. For this question, the answer is not straightforward. One can say that this model is suitable. The suitability of the model depends on its parameterization or calibration and validation. So if your model, a cropping system model, can capture the measurable physical processes in the target agroecological condition, you can use it. For instance, several cropping system models in the framework of GSAT are tested widely in West Africa: cereals maize, cereals sorghum, crop grown cotton, and a model like AFSIM, also EPIC, SARA, they were tested in West Africa condition. Okay, so the suitability of the model, I can't advise you that cereals maize is the best or AFSIM is the best to be used. But the best model to be used depends on the parameterization. So I can also highlight that all the models currently do not consider all the nutrients that are required for proper crop nutrition. The existing crop model accounts for nitrogen, and to some extent, DESAT, a cereals model now, is sensitive to phosphorus dynamic, but the remaining model are not sensitive. So if I want to study climate change impact using nitrogen management as a plant nutrition strategy, the model that are sensitive, the model that can capture the underlying process affecting nitrogen are welcome.
Okay, thank you, Professor Amouzou. So we have a question from Mr. Anselme Kwame. I think he's a student. He's from Senegal. I know this student very well. Thanks for the question, Anselme. He said, pointed out that the climate change will probably reduce the efficiency of use of water and nitrogen. Then what would be the impact of this climate change on the other major nutrients, such as phosphorus and potassium?
Yeah, so the end of the response to the first one come here again to evaluate the impact of climate change on phosphorus or potassium uptake depend on the ability of the model to simulate. Currently, cereals maize model and cereals sorghum model were update or upgrade to respond to phosphorus dynamic. That is why in my result, I show the effect on P uptake. But currently for potassium uptake, most of the process-based model didn't account for those nutrients or even account for a secondary or micronutrient. So that is a limitation. And it is also a research outlook for agronomists to work, provide input data for crop modelers to improve the structure of their model.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Qisawi Radwan is wondering, in climate change, all the ecosystems are influenced, including microorganism diversity. So how can the application of this microorganism, for example, the GPR, help on climate change adaptation? So I don't know if you have touched on this one, but he's concerned about if these microorganisms can mitigate the impact of the change in climate.
Yeah, I do not touch this point, and it was not a research interest for me. But in my opinion, climate change will affect soil temperature and water availability. And therefore, water and temperature affect largely soil organic matter mineralization. So, and microorganic activity in the soil. So there is a link, but I can't elaborate on how it will help mitigate the impact. But for sure, the correlation is clear that climate parameters will affect microorganism activities in the root zone for the mineralization of nutrients. But to what might be the nature and the extent, I can't elaborate more on that.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Vincent Adurabiga. He said the most widely used model in the DSSAT and APSIN, can we have our own that is tailored for Africa farming systems? Very good question. Have you worked on any model, outside this DSSAT and APSIN, Professor Amouzou?
No, actually, I'm a desert model user. I use a series and crop growth series model and crop growth model within the desert framework. But I actually agree with Vincent that APSIM and desert model are widely used across Africa. It is possible for crop modelers to develop a model and tailor it to Africa condition, but it is also possible to domesticate APSIM and desert model in our Africa context. And on this, as he highlighted that those models are widely used, evidence exists that desert model and APSIM model are doing a great job. But to tailor them to our condition, we need to use a good quality data so that those models in their calibration and validation capture the major cross response according to the condition, the local condition in Africa agroecological context.
Yeah, Professor Amouzou, just I would like again to come back to this very interesting question about this using models, either deriving our own models in Africa or using models from outside. So, but you said, I remember at the end of your talk that all this depends on the getting data and getting data which are reliable. So could you say that today at the African level, from the research institute and the academic organization working on these topics from the research point of view, could we say that we do have in our hands efficient data, enough data to start developing new models?
Actually not. Data may exist, but what is the quality? The quality of the data. For instance, to model soil moisture dynamic in Sub-Saharan Africa, the data are not available. They are not available. A crop model, crop modelers are looking for so much dynamic data collected on ground, but they are not available. And if in Africa, if the data are available, the data are still in the hand of somebody somewhere. So we have to work together in developing a credible database on soil, climate, and crops, so that if those data are available, it will become very easy for a crop modeler to use those data as an input. So I know that the efforts are going on with West Africa, a climate service center on climate change and adapted land use, or is that WASCAL that is thinking to develop a climate database to provide climate ecosystem services to end users and different stakeholders. But other organizations can work in developing a good database, and people can have a free access to those data and use them. Currently, for Africa, we need to make an effort in getting a good quality data and making them available for use. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, you're right. The data is the bottleneck for this process. Hopefully, we will have in few years coming a really reliable database that we can use. So Jean-Mélène Amari, she said, as you said, a real ISFM consider local practices. So I want to know if some research studies have been conducted in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and if yes, she's asking if you can give some a case study and other sources about that.
Okay. At the best of my knowledge, I recognize that through the literature there are evidence on research conducted in integrated soil fertility management in Cote d'Ivoire, even using a cover crop as a source of organic input in Cote d'Ivoire, and using also a crop residue recycling. Yeah, I come across evidence on that aspect. But apart from Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Burkina Faso, and Benin and Nigeria, there are several evidence from work conducted by some of our partner institutes like FDC. Evidence exists, but the question is the adoption.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a question from Professor Mohammed Boulif. I always, when Professor Mohammed Boulif is asking some question, I always put them because they are really good, and it's online with what's happening in Africa. Thank you, Professor Mohammed, for this. He said, can conservation agriculture techniques, for example, reduced or minimum tillage, help Sub-Saharan African agriculture to cope with climate change, especially water shortage? It's really an agronomist question.
Yeah, yeah. The question is actually interesting because indirectly across sub-Saharan Africa, a minimum tillage is going on because farmers are using herbicide to clean their plots and make a direct seeding. I have several cases in Ivory Coast. And these practices, for sure, as the soil is not tilled, it's covered, it has direct influence on soil moisture content, and it will help. It will help. I think it is one of the way in mitigating impact of climate change with focus on water saving, using it as water saving technique, and at the same time with its positive effects on nutrient cycling. So I completely agree with Professor. It can contribute in mitigating a climate change, and it's among climate smart agriculture practices.
Okay. So we have a question from one of our colleagues from OCP Africa. I think OCP Africa, Ghana. He's thanking you for the presentation that was very informative, and he's asking, how do we connect the researcher from science point of view to farmers and also to policymakers? Really a very important question, because and it's been asked many times for any topic. So how we translate all these and all these things that raise awareness of the policymakers and also help the farmers benefiting from the research results.
Yeah, this is a very important question. I'm aware of that, and I recognize that in Africa, the linkage between the research and the end users, farmers, as well as the decision makers, is not straightforward. And we have to work on it. How to bring the research result to farmers. For instance, in our case, working with APNI, we are used to conduct on-farm trial with implication of farmers, and with aim to develop education material. So this linkage of research with outreach is mandatory for Africa by now. Linking the research to the end users through appropriate capacity building and accessible education material. The results of the research are on a high impact journal. The farmer doesn't have access to high impact journal. If a farmer even have access to high impact journal, the way the results are translated are not appropriate for the understanding of the farmer. So linking the research with outreach is important for Africa. That is one of the limitations maybe for some system innovations adoption.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a question from Samuel Buya. In the face of changing climate, what soil productivity improvement approach best suits the Sub-Saharan African context? Samuel Buya is one of the students in fertilizer science and technology.
Okay. From the evidence that I showed in the case study, it's quite sure that integration of inorganic fertilizer with organic input from different various sources may help in mitigating the impact of climate change. And this is crucial for the Sub-Saharan Africa, because the soil in Sub-Saharan Africa have a very low nutrient organic matter content. And the low soil organic matter condition, you can intensify inorganic fertilizer use, the efficiency must be low. So under future climate condition in based on the result that I presented, combining inorganic fertilizer with organic amendments will help, even though it shows that it can't offset completely the negative impact. It can help mitigate because the yield and the integrated soil fertility management strategy in future climate remain higher than the average yield that we observe currently in Africa. But the best approach need evidence, needs to be tested on ground or need to be tested based on the crop modeling. So without testing the strategy, we can't elaborate more on other strategy that can make evidence under current condition, but with question mark under future climate impact.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Amouzou. So we have Mr. Sufyan Fal. He said, can you please explain how low nitrogen fertilizer can lead plant adaptation to climate change?
How low nitrogen fertilizer can lead plant nutrition to climate change adaptation. I think in the context of Africa, low nitrogen fertilizer as a strategy for adaptation, I'm not sure it will work because the condition is already a nitrogen limited environment. So we need to increase the level of nitrogen in our production system. Currently, it is low. So, and evidence exists that increasing the level of nitrogen fertilizer improve a crop response to elevated CO2 environment. So without nitrogen fertilization, the positive effect that a crop can get from the physiological response to elevated CO2, it is low. So yes, the model can be parameterized and evaluated to work in low nitrogen input environments, but as an adaptation strategy, we need to go to increase the level of nitrogen management in Africa higher than the level we are today.
Okay. A question from Mr. Al-Ghazwani Mehdi, again, is another student. By means of simulation tools, can feasible pathways to food secure and sustainable future in terms of research and policy implemented be identified? He's asking if, go ahead, please.
Yeah, by means of a simulation tool, one can test innovations. And this innovation, once they support high crop productivity, but in environmentally sound manner, they will bring us to a sustainable food production system. So yes, crop model or simulation tool can help in framing options for increased food security and sustainable cropping systems in Africa. That is for sure.
Okay. So a question about the, from Mr. Peter Simon Weir. Did you take into consideration the effect of declining soil carbon on response to HMF?
Yeah, I will respond yes to this question. Currently, the CRS model accounts for a soil carbon dynamic. But in my study, under high use of mineral fertilizer, a crop residue were removed, and crop residue were kept under the integrated soil fertility management package to see the effect of integrated soil fertility management option versus intensification. And the difference that we have in response with the integrated management practices versus the intensification clearly is at the benefit of the soil organic matter. Because under intensification, without recycling the residue, organic matter will decline, but with integrated soil fertility management options, inorganic fertilizer will benefit from the organic amendment, which is a crop residue that was studied. So for sure, uh, carbon aspects, it is embedded in the SRS framework.
Okay, we have a question from a specialist of the chain values in agriculture. It's Professor Ahmed Abadi. Is one of our faculty members at the university. Is asking, sustainable development requires sustainable strategies. Scalability is key to successfully market resilient nutrition. How can we promote in the African context the innovative solutions?
Okay, I think one previous question was a response to one question related to research and outreach. I will use the same response here to bring or to promote innovative solutions in the context of Africa. We need to close the gap between the innovation developers, extension agents, and end users. That is fundamental. The research can develop a robust strategy that are required for sustainable development. But if the gap, the current gap, which exists between research, extension, and the end users exists, the adoption will be limited. But by closing this gap, it is also important to support the end users, farmers, by improving their capacity and resources endowment in terms of financial access to credit, access to market information. So we will see the whole system, not only one aspect. So the whole chain must be taken into consideration to boost innovation adoption in the continent.
Thank you, Professor Amouzou. We have a question from Ado Yusuf. He's thanking you for the presentation. And he said that the output from the CRS model is impressive. That he's talking about the model that you showed. What is the way forward?
Yeah.
Farmers feel since these are computer outputs.
Okay. I mean, I used to conduct my researches on farm. I started with on-station research, but when I was involved in research from my PhD, I like to do my research on farm. It is very important because on farm research, you interact with the farmers. The result that I share here, the farmers that collaborate in my research are aware of the outputs. The farmers are aware of the output, but those farmers are a minor group in my research zone. But to bring these results to many farmers, we need to translate these publications that are available in scientific journal into education material that can be accessible to farmers.
Thank you, Professor Amouzou. I have a question from James Stewart. He said that the current rapid rate of climate change seems to impose new and potentially overwhelming pressures on existing adaptation capacities. So what do you think? What you think that sub-Saharan countries will adapt quickly?
Yeah, the sub-Saharan country will adapt quickly. Yeah, I think there is no way to go. Climate change and variability is obvious across the continent. For instance, if I consider what is going on in a Sahelian zone, seed priming, sorghum seed priming is a strategy that farmers use to adapt to erratic onset of rainfall. So I showed on one of my slides a photo of Zite technologies. So yes, farmers are coping in their manner to climate change. For instance, if they use Zite technology with harvesting water, they create a microclimate condition for nutrients and soil moisture availability to sustain the crop growth. But adapt quickly need a policy action. It need also a policy action.
Okay. A question from Professor Boulerbah Ali. I think he's an expert of soil rehabilitation remediations. I know the Professor Ali. He published a lot in this domain, and also the use of microorganisms also in this area. He said maybe the negative effect of climate change is huge then on nutrient uptake in soils. Is there any model to follow the effect of climate change on soil biology and activities? I mean, he meant, I guess, is there any model that can follow the impact on the population of the microbiome of the soil?
Okay, that is a very good question. To the best of my knowledge, the existing model account for a soil carbon dynamic. So this is a very good outlook for research. It's a very good outlook for research. So in my opinion, up to now, yeah, a few, not many, even few capture the soil carbon dynamic. And so organic matter. But biological activities is challenging. It's challenging. Even biotic stress on above ground biomass is still challenging, not fully embedded. But I saw there is a research where a temperature influence was coupled with nematodes using a series model, but not much at the best of my knowledge at this moment.
So here's one of the question from Mr. Femi Ogansifuni. He's from Nigeria. He said, can the adoption of genetically modified crops be an option to combat changing climate condition and nutrition use efficiency in Sub-Saharian African countries?
In my opinion, I think that there is a large diversification of a crop genotype in Africa that we can use. We just use a few of the diversity that we have. I think the best way for us in Africa is to use the existing diversification that we have as a coping strategy instead of going for a GMO. There is a huge diversity in crops. I think that even one of the last presentation on cocoyams talk about the existing diversification that in Africa, but we use a few of them. So we have to explore first the existing diversification and find within them a coping strategy instead of going straight forward for a GMO pathway.
Yeah, that was a talk by Professor Michel Ghanem on orphan crops. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Where he stressed that some of the crops are underused in Africa.
Yes.
The biodiversity that can be used. So there is a lot of questions that are highlighting the concern again about the results obtained from this scientific research and the translation to the farmers' concern. So people are really concerned about the gap that exists between these two bodies. I mean, the scientists doing research, fantastic research on in these topics, plant nutrition and the impact of climate change, and also the farmers who is concerned about the yield, is concerned about what crop and which fertilizer. And I have a link to all these questions. A question by again by Professor Mohammed Boulif, which could be an answer. Are farmer field schools being used to educate farmer in sub-Saharan countries? Of course, on what is happening in the scientific domain.
Yeah, for sure. During your introduction of myself, you say that I'm from African Plant Nutrition Institute.
Yes.
African Plant Nutrition Institute, our results come from on-farm research, and our research platforms serve as a demos to demonstrate a nutrient management strategies. So Professor Boulif, for sure, farmers field school are used to educate farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa. Our colleague from North Africa are doing the same, and our colleague from East Africa are doing the same on sustainable nutrient management using a farmer field school. But I agree that we have to multiply the demos to train more and more farmers. For instance, here in Ivory Coast, during the last growing season, about 200 farmers benefited from agronomic training and sustainable nutrient management practices through a farmer field school. And this is planned for Burkina Faso, Togo as well. And Dr. Akim from APNI North Africa is doing it as well in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and in Senegal. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks, Professor Amouzou, and thanks, Professor Bouli, for discussing this. So I have a very technical question, but I don't know if you will be able to answer it. This is from Mr. Jawhar Mohammed. He's a student, and he's thanking you for the presentation, and he's asking, in your opinion, in your point of view, can slow release fertilizer helps to improve considerably the agriculture yield?
Yes, I will respond by yes, because the rationale behind the use of a slow release fertilizer is to avoid a nutrient loss, particularly nitrogen, that must be released and synchronized with the crop development stages. Yeah, best timing for the release of nutrients help improve the nutrient uptake and use efficiency. So, if all the conditions in so much are gathered, yes, a slow release fertilizer can help effectively improve yield. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Amouzou. Now, I just want, because I will summarize also other questions. They are all related somehow to the models being used or being imported from outside and being used by scientists dealing with issues related to the climate change and also crop models in Africa. So where are we now? So about the efficiency of these models. I know that from your presentation, Professor Amouzou, you have nicely showed how useful were the models. Generally speaking, so could we say today that the data being used now, the models being used, have really helped moving forward and fixing some issue related to plant nutrition also in the changing climate context?
Yes, yes, yes. The use of data, a field result data, and coupled with crop model help to achieve a great progress in developing a plant nutrition strategy. I didn't talk much about this decision support tool because we are under a climate change, but it is also useful for climate change nutrient expert tool. For instance, nutrient expert tool that help to develop a site-specific fertilizer recommendation for farmers. But it need, before developing, generating the recommendation for farmers, it need input the data set. So for sure, we can't continue with a field study all the time, but we have to combine a field study with a cropping system modeling. That is, it will help us to develop a adaptation strategy and achieve a tremendous impact, for sure. For the future, I think that is the way to go. Combine field research with crop system modeling.
Okay, so we have Peter Simon Bewer coming back, thanking you for having answered his previous question. And now he's raising the issue about soil acidity. So soil acidity is another important challenge to plant nutrition in sub-Saharan countries, African countries. Do we have any information on the effect of climate change on soil pH?
I did not capture these aspects of climate change impact, but in my opinion, it is possible to have impact there since pH have a relationship with a nutrient release and their uptake. So from the moment warming temperature will affect a soil moisture dynamic, there will be a link, but I didn't study specifically that point to elaborate on it.
Okay. We have a, thank you, Professor Amouzou. I have a question from Amarjit Basra, saying that is, in your opinion, what should be the top priority to build soil health in Africa and how it could be accomplished?
Okay.
Very, very big question.
Yeah, actually, big question. I will take the first part. The top priority to build soil health in Africa. I think one of the major constraints for a soil fertility in Africa is the low level of soil organic carbon. And when talking carbon and soil organic matter, it is directly related to soil soil biological activities. So we have to tackle the improvement of organic matter content of African soil. And I read one paper that highlights that by improving the soil organic carbon, we increase the yield. So it is important to start from there. But I will also link it with research. We need evidence-based decision making on these aspects. So the way to go forward on that in implementation of this research and the output link it to end users. Yeah, but policy action is also important because soil degradation in Africa is mainly due to deforestation. And deforestation, forest zones are becoming savanna, going at the expenses of soil health. Even the use of pesticides is becoming common in Africa, but a pesticide use have implicitly adverse effects in soil biological activity. So I think there is also a policy action to be taken there to implement action that can help us promote a soil health, soil health across the continent. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mamuzu. As we are approaching the end of this very interesting webinar, so I will just select 3 or 4 questions, no more. There is a lot of questions. We are really sorry that we cannot, elaborate on all the questions and answer them. But of course, you can still in the discussion section of the video, you can still go ahead and ask questions. Probably Professor Amouzou will answer them when he gets to see them in YouTube. So one of the last 3 questions is from Pascal, is from Pierre Pascal Bien. Again, one of the students of the fertilizer science and technology master degree. So, and he's from Senegal. He said how the 4 R's nutrient stewardship can be applied in sub-Saharan countries. I just want to highlight one thing before we go ahead with the question. For the people who are not familiar with the 4 R's, so the 4 R's are referring to right fertilizer source, right rate, right time, and right place. So this is 4 R's.
Yeah.
Okay, so he said how the 4 R's nutrient stewardship can be applied in sub-Saharan African countries as climate change adaptation, and what could be the challenges.
Okay, good. For our nutrient stewardship is now currently in implementation in Africa. So since IPNI and now APNI, we are deploying for a solution across Africa, in North Africa, West Africa, and East Africa. So for instance, by applying the first the first one, the right source, you can mitigate climate impacts. For instance, one of the question was if a slow release fertilizer can help mitigate climate change impact. If I'm a farmer, I have a possibility to have access to such a fertilizer. I can use it to cope with losses. And next, in my presentation, it was clear that the use of inorganic fertilizer combined with organic amendment improve use efficiency. So based on 4R, I can select the source of organic amendment that I can use in my context and the source of inorganic fertilizer that I can use to adapt to the local conditions. And based on a rainfall condition prevailing in the region, you can say, okay, it is suitable to go for 2-split nitrogen application or 3-split nitrogen application. So for sure, for us, stewardship have its mitigation, climate change mitigation aspects. So for sure, I think for us have a way on its front in a mitigation, a climate change impact. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the one, not the last one, but the one before the last one is from Anthony Ogbe. One would expect water and nutrient-based specific models for better prediction than CERES, for example. Aqua model for water efficiency or model for nitrogen and carbon in agrosystem, Monica for nitrogen use. So what do you think, Professor Amouzou, about this comment?
Yeah, any model that can capture a soil, water, and nutrient dynamics are a good model to use in face of climate change, because the two parameters will become critical. And from the moment the model will be unable to simulate or to represent rigorously the dynamic of water and nutrients, it's not necessary to use them to simulate a future climate impact on any soil fertility management strategy. So yes, since the model can capture water and nutrient dynamic, they can be used. I know the aqua crop model. So it is a model with more focus on water use and scheduling of irrigation scheme. But for a serious model, yes, you can incorporate irrigation scheme, but the underlying process related to water balance and nutrient balance are well developed. So
Okay.
if the model does not account for water balance and nutrient balance, uh, using it for climate change model, the uncertainty in the quantification of the impact will be very large.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Amouzou. So the last one is from myself. The last question.
Okay.
So it's how to give you a way that you can summarize also. So we do have students following this webinar and watching this, and probably they are somehow wondering what will be in terms of research today in this topic of plant nutrition and the impact of changing climate. What would be the hot topic where they can be looking for new findings and also starting new PhD, for example, projects, or even people who are just finishing or within their PhD programs that they can probably look at very carefully.
Yes, I will suggest them that priorities to capture a soil moisture dynamic and how it triggers nutrient availability and use and uptake. It is very crucial. This is important to generate a data as the input for model parameterization and validation, because currently the model are challenged by capturing the underground processes. They are doing well to simulate biomass, to simulate yield at the harvest, but to simulate the underground in a root zone, the dynamic, it is challenging. But to solve this challenge, we need evidence from research. So if a student can tackle these aspects, it is a good. And another student can use those data in a development of a robust model that capture those biophysical processes. So I think if I have to suggest them a research pathway, as they are not actually crop modelers to improve the model structures, but they can do a field research based on the underground process that impacts crop models accuracy in simulating water use efficiency or nutrient use efficiency. Yep.
Thank you very much, Professor Amouzou, for really spending the time answering the questions and also elaborating on this very interesting topic, which is the plant nutrition and the impact of the climate change in the Sub-Saharian African countries. Again, thank you in the name of all the participants, in the name of ESAFE. I would like to thank you again. Thanks also to our colleagues from I know that you are from African Plant Nutrition Institute, who are contributing a lot to our webinars. Again, thank you for your time and also for having shared with us your research focus and also the advices to the students. Thank you very much. So,
Thank you.
yeah, we will be continuing this webinar series with a new speaker from the African Plant Nutrition Institute on next Monday. Next Monday I will host Professor Hakim Boulal from the African Plant Nutrition Institute, and he's will be talking about tailoring nutrient management for conservation agriculture in Africa. So again, we are continuing on this series in plant nutrition and nutrient management. and this time with a Moroccan researcher, Moroccan professor, Hakim Boulal from the African Plant Nutrition Institute. Again, thanks to our colleagues from African Plant Nutrition for contributing to these webinars. So just in the by talking about plant nutrition, African Plant Nutrition Institute, they are also contributing to our master degrees. And one of the master degrees that is really in the relationship with this topic that you have elaborated on, Professor Amouzou, is fertilizer science and technology. So I know that there is some students there that are wondering how they can probably get to this kind of research topic and how they can be trained in plant nutrition. So fertilizer science and technology is a master degree developed at the School of Agriculture of University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco. So you can apply for this one, and majority of the professors from African Plant Nutrition Institute and also world-renowned faculty members are also teaching this master degree. You just have to ask to send a request to the email that you can see here, esaf@um6p.ma. So we can also discuss and also send a request through WhatsApp, but in the number that is highlighted here in this slide. So you will be some of the professors and some of the coordinators, mainly Mr. Ismail Ghorbal, who is coordinating this master degree, will answer your questions and also give you all the guidelines to apply for this master degree. This master degree, again, is been developed by the Agriculture School of University Mohammed VI Polytechnic, and it's open its doors for new cohort of students. So, and majority of our students are from Sub-Saharian countries. Of course, scholarship and also financial aids are given to the most brightest students, and following the admission and admission and entrance examinations. Thank you again for following this webinar. I repeat that our next speaker is Professor Hakim Boulal. He's from African Plant Nutrition. It will be on Monday next week at 2 p.m. He will be talking about tailoring nutrient management for conservation agriculture in Africa. So we will be more than happy to see you again next week. So again, thank you for your participation. Thanks to our colleagues and partners from OCP-Africa, from RUFORUM, and from the African Plant Nutrition Institute. Thank you again for your participation. I see you next Monday. Thank you, Professor Amouzou, for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.